welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Mookie Spitz, and I'm thrilled to have narrator and author C.S.E. Cooney on the factory floor. Hello.
Thank you so much for having me, Mookie.
Thank you so much for making time. And I know our viewers and listeners can't wait to hear about your third installment in the Saint Death trilogy. It started out as a World Fantasy Award-winning novel back in 2022, Saint Death's Daughter, The Adventures of Lainey Stone and her necrophilic exploits, right?
Well, necromancy. She loves the dead. She just doesn't love the dead.
Yes. Maybe I'm projecting a little bit, but definitely a moody, macabre, maudlin narrative. Really great stuff. And we'll dive into that in a second. And then you followed up with Saint Death's Herald. And, not too much spoiler alert here, the third installment, which will be coming out this year, later this year? Next year. All right. Fans are dying. Saint Death's Doorway.
Yes. The last. And it will be like 20 years of work in those 3 books.
Yes. That is astonishing in and of itself. And speaking about your trajectory and journey as a writer, you started out in poetry, and it really shows in your prose, which is just so lovely to read and deep. And then you got into short story writing. So you've got short story.
I do. I would say I did write a lot of novels in notebooks in like 6th grade through high school. So by the time high school was done, I had written 3 novels, but juvenilia. My writing mentor, who's a science fiction writer named Gene Wolfe, told me at that point, he was like, it's time to set aside novel writing and concentrate on your craft. And he said the way he had done it, and very much a 20th century trajectory, was you write short stories and you get your byline out in the world and you hone your craft and you meet people in the genre, and then you go back to writing novels. And so I was like, oh, I guess I'd better do that. And also went to school for writing at that point in college. So by the time I got back to novel writing, I had done a lot of other things, but I think novel writing was a first love. Poetry too, and songwriting, but they were all short stories were the hardest thing for me, and they still aren't a natural format, but I certainly have concentrated a great deal of my time trying to learn how to do them.
So you were following what you felt was a traditional path toward being a professional writer, which was short story, master the shorter form, and then you'll be ready for the novel.
There's a lot of not only mastering the short form, but the submission process, the publishing process, getting pro rates, and then having enough things on your cover letter so that when you submit a novel to an agent, they know that to take you maybe slightly more seriously than the rest of their slush pile. And when I started doing this in the early aughts, it was toward the end of when you could still submit self-addressed stamped envelopes, SASEs, physical paper and printouts, and just at the beginning of submitting electronic manuscripts. And so all of that has changed, and all of them, almost not all of them, but most of the magazines have moved into ebook form over paper printing. There are fewer than there were, and now with the AI dumps that are happening, these small teams of devoted and passionate editors have much more slush, literal, nonsense to deal with. So it's not going to be an easy trajectory for a new writer now, unless we think of a new way of moving our young writers forward. But certainly when I started, it was toward the end of a traditional 20th century trajectory that my mentor knew and advised me toward. Now I have friends who have gone completely different ways and kind of played a long game of, they didn't want to write short stories. They just wrote novels and novels and kept submitting, and on their 5th, then suddenly an enormous deal. And they waited 20 years to do that, but I had worked 20 years in a different way to do that, and we're now still on the same level that if we had done the same thing when we started. So it was an interesting beginning where it wasn't the only path, but at that time, as I was a little rule follower, and my mentor was like this, and this, and I was like, oh, a way, a path. So I tried to do that, even though it wasn't my natural like inclination to write short stories.
So now you're in your element, which is the lush, moody, dense novels, character focused.
Definitely character
Cool.
focused. I don't know that I would call my writing moody. Lush, I think that I do like esoteric words a lot, but I think they're funny. So I mean, you know, moody in the sense, do you remember the Addams Family? There's a big move
Yes.
that's happening. There's like, you know,
Tim Burton, Nightmare Before Christmas.
and Tim Burton has a very much of like a German expressionist film style where like it's like spirals and things at odd angles, and it's very moody and gothic, but it's funny and it's clownish, and I feel like I'm more in that vibe. Like I definitely go dark, but I try to keep a light touch on it because I find that more interesting to have a goofy footnote or to have an unexpected thing happen. I'm not really interested in despair or downward spirals. They occasionally occur narratively, but I try to have my characters claw out of that as soon as possible. I'm much more interested in like in community over like lone wolfing it. You know, I'm not a grim dark writer. I am occasionally grim and occasionally dark, but I try to do like, I don't know, grim goofy, dark bright, whatever combination of words that you want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, in Saint Death's Daughter, the setup exemplifies what you're mentioning, which is it's so quirky.
Yes,
where death and murder become kind of like a business. Like they're
a family of like butchers or bakers, but their business is death. And Lainey is born with an allergy to violence. So she's born into a business family, and she cannot perform that business without getting terribly sick. But that allergy to violence is an early indication that she might be a necromancer, which is a very rare form of magic, in that she's so averse to violence and so compassionate toward the dead that she can raise the dead, which is very different from like your father randomly beheading people, you know, or your mother being the court poisoner. So she's already at odds with her family of sort of well-bred psychopaths, and yet that's all the teachers she has. It's all the history she knows. It's what she's surrounded with. So the first book's a Bildungsroman in that she is coming of age and learning that everything she's learned is wrong, and finding different teachers, and also just coming to conclusions of what she feels, what she's observed versus what she's been taught. So the first is a coming of age novel, much like many. There's a huge time jump. She goes from 15 to 22 in the middle of the book. And then the second book is much more like streamlined. She's the same age as, you know, just a matter of a few weeks that all happens. It's kind of like a car chase novel, only there are no cars involved. There's a flying undead tiger rug. And it's a little bit like those TV movie, like there's TV series where, you know, you've got the detective and the serial killer, and only she's the necromancer and she's chasing a terrible hungry ghost. And as he's ravening through people, she's trying to mitigate the death as much as possible to lay him to rest, which is her job as a basically like the wizard of the god of death. And a wizard is somebody almost saintly in that they're blessed. The more attention you pay to a god and the more focus you put on them, the more the god is like, oh, someone's paying attention, and the more the god focuses on you. And that focus, that mutual like concentration, is what magic is. So, but you know, not everybody's monofocused. Most people just like to live their lives and not be obsessed with eldritch things. So there aren't many wizards in the world. It takes a very specific kind of like mind that prefers living half out of this world in some ways, and it's not always healthy, you know. And so part of Lainey's job as a wizard is work-life balance and remembering that she's alive and a living person, and that the living are also her concern as well as the dead and the undead. So it's kind of the uber lesson that she needs to keep learning, and also just, you know, laying undead ghosts to rest kind of thing.
So the first book is kind of all in the family, like an Addams Family style. It's her
Yeah.
struggle. She's the black sheep in what would be a black magic kind of family. So maybe she's like the white sheep, where she wants to free herself, but it's all she knows. And in
What
the
is love,
second,
black sheep?
yeah, and in the second book, in the Herald, she comes out of that family and she applies herself to the world in this faster pace.
Yeah, the second book is there's a lot of combat, which is not something I'd written a lot of before. And so much of what my like kind of thesis of that is that like, because the ghost that she's laying to rest is her great grandfather, who also had been a necromancer, like what these two very different wizards who have the same power, what they were like, both as living and as dead, and what does the present generation have to do? What are they obliged to do to make recompense for the crimes of their ancestors? And that like part of it is laying the ghost to rest, but also like, how do you go on? How do you make the world better in the wake of this destruction that is now several generations old? What are you obliged to do? What are you not obliged to do? And how do you let that affect you? So like, that's kind of the bigger thing. And also like improvisation. So she has a great and terrible magic, but she never can use it the same way twice. There's never the same set of circumstances. She's always in a novel position where nothing she has learned before will probably be able to help her in this moment. So she's constantly calling on not just her god, but other gods, other disciplines of magic, and sort of, again, making connections and community that are far weirder than even her weird life has been to date. So a lot of it is like that, kind of like her superpower is really not just necromancy, it's improvisation and making connections under pressure, basically.
Yeah, and how close is Lainey to you, Claire? Is she a projection of your younger self coming into adulthood? When you write, do you feel like she's a representation of some of your own struggles in
Oh,
that kind of way?
I love her. I feel like a deep affection for her, and I feel like she has some questions that I have. Like, I think a lot of us growing up now look back on our educations, like public school, private school, American history, and we're like, that all, if not all of it was lies, it's so much of it is lies, and so much is harmful and self-aggrandizing. So like in that sense, like questioning what and in the sense of like being a writer, like there's a certain way where I'm kind of dreamy, and much of my life have lived kind of in my head, and realizing as I grew older and older, just like people are so important and so beautiful, and I may have this overblown ego of my important work, what I need to do, but really actually like leaving the door open and turning around and paying attention and like getting out of my own head. Those are all important things. So it's not like necromancy and violence. I do think that in fantasy, in literature, and in television and movies, most of the solutions are violent ones, like almost to a ridiculous degree, where somebody has an argument on film and the answer to that is punch them in the face and then walk off screen and you end the scene. And it's just like, my challenge to myself was, can I write an epic fantasy novel or even a trilogy where my protagonist cannot solve problems by violence in a violent world, in a world as violent as ours, but with mitigating factors such as necromancy and raising the dead, which we don't have in this world. So in a way, I got a little get out of jail free card, that's wish fulfillment and wishful thinking, but it's a way to think about this awful world we live in, the kind of trash fire, and a way to like connect to hope, and to just reimagine the idea that most of us aren't going to solve problems by punching somebody in the face. Most of us don't actually do that. We have to kind of think creatively, and it would be nice to see more of our art reflect what most of us have to do, even hyperbolized. So like, this is a hyperbolic situation where if she's confronted with ravenous phantoms, and she could very well like sacrifice some blood or an animal, and like call up undead armies and become a great sorceress queen or whatever, but she actually just like is much more of a cupcake than that. But it does physically harm her sometimes, and it's hard, and it scars her, and she withdraws and she comes back. So anyway, those are things I explore, but it's not, I wouldn't say she's me, except that everything I write is coming from me. But the villain might as well be me, and like those, even the psychopathic stones is, are that, part of human nature, where if I can imagine doing it, it's like people have done worse and they were humans just like me. So how culpable am I? And I'm sure I do harm every day, without even realizing it, because that's kind of the systems that we live in. So it's trying to think about that, but in every work of fiction is simplified from reality, no matter how intricate and ornate the language and world building.
Seems like a coming of age story where she uses
Yes.
creativity rather than violence or heightened drama to get her where she needs to go. And it starts in the family, trying to figure that out, goes out into the world as a problem solver.
Mm-hmm.
And then how does that catapult into the third book, The Doorway?
So I'm doing a little trick, and that is, because I'm not really trying to write YA. I'm trying to write, so the first one has some YA elements in that the protagonist starts at 15 and ends at 22, which bridges the age gap in marketing between YA and new adult. But the second one, she's fully 22, which is mostly new adult or just regular adult. And the third one, she's 32. She's 10 years older. Like, I'm interested in, like, okay, now she's had her powers and her fullness for 10 years. She has been living an academic life. She has been writing papers and collaborating with other great wizard minds in the world. So she's fully powerful. And now she's invited to do a thing, again, that she's never done before, which is to investigate a series of magical murders in the court of her once enemy, the Blackbird Bride, who's the big bad of book one. And it's the Blackbird Bride's children and heirs who are dying of a mysterious wasting illness that probably has to do with death magic somehow. And the Blackbird Bride knows that, even though they were rivals, it couldn't be Lainey, because she would never do anything like that. So she is kind of offered amnesty and a reversal of exile to Lainey, to if she helps her to solve this mystery. So Lainey is doing a new novel magic. She has disguised herself as someone else completely, to the point of she is collaborating with a dead person and their personality and their body. And she's like wearing a whole different body who has its own awareness. And Lainey is sort of subsumed in that personality. And that person is the investigator. That person is not aware that they're just a constructed being. So it's going to be the kind of like question of, if it's not life, it's not death, and it's not undeath, what's this other thing, this like unlife, this artificial intelligence, if you will, like it, something that believes it's self-aware but isn't. What is Lainey's responsibility as its creatrix? And that's just like on the level. And then also, who's killing the Blackbird Bride's heirs? Datu, who's her niece, and she's just like a little girl in the first two books, is now fully an adult, 17 and a half, which is an adult in this world, and is helping her with the investigation.
Do they know that she's Lainey, or is she disguised in this new body?
People in the court that she's investigating do not know. The Blackbird Bride knows who Lainey is, and her niece is there undercover as well as her brother-in-law. So there's like a contingent who are there.
And they know. And in ways that's come around full circle. So the nemesis is now a collaborator in ways.
Yeah, to a degree, because the nemesis, who is a great and powerful sorceress queen in her own right, highly respects Lainey, always kind of wanted her on her side. Lainey just didn't want to be involved in all that for various reasons. And this woman is in great distress, and her children are dying, but is still a politician with a great deal of power, and on a certain level can never be trusted because of that. So Lainey is in alliance currently. In this part of the book, I'm 45,000 words in. It has to be about 100,000 words. So I'm almost halfway done. And I know what's going to happen. And I also know it's like very tenuous, because the Blackbird Bride knows who she is, but she's investigating the Blackbird Bride's whole court. So they can't know who Lainey is. They're super scared of Lainey as a necromancer already from the first two books. They wouldn't trust her if she came as herself. So which is why she's in disguise.
You are effervescent in terms of describing your own narrative. How does that translate to the very introspective process of actually writing?
Mm.
When you channel all that, you're bubbly, you're vivacious, and it's got to be such a state change to spend so much time in your own mind translating it to the page. How do you balance that, and how do you, in a sense, subsume all of your energy into the creativity for writing that great prose?
Well, I love footnotes. So sometimes I get overexcited and I write something huge, and it's just like what my mentor used to call, like, he's like, you've got great dialogue, but then you interrupt it with lumps of prose like uncooked dumplings. Well, like, so I get enthusiastic. I'm like, oh, this is such a great piece of writing. It really doesn't belong here. Footnote. And so a lot of like my goofy histories or like etymologies or things that I find very crunchy and interesting, but really don't fit narratively, I'll be like, that's a footnote. And I think some people hate footnotes and some people read just for the footnotes. And so I'm really writing for the latter half of those readers. And I feel like for a first draft, which is what I'm on, ebullience is key to the writing process. So it's not for me not to feel, that old writerly anguish and ennui of like, oh, nothing's working. And I just need a nap. I've just been writing for 3 hours and I've got 3 sentences and they're all terrible. Instead of that, I would just make a big mess, like really just a big mess that is practically incomprehensible the next day when I read it. But it is there on the page for me to comb through and to be like, oh, that I know what I think I meant, but the thought doesn't follow the next thought. I love revision. That's like the most fun. That's why the first book took me 12 years. The second book couldn't because I was on deadline. Same thing with this one. And I love like the more interesting word, which not everybody appreciates, because as one of my writing teachers once told me, she said, you have delicious words, but sometimes red is just red. And I was like, yes, but vermilion, so I have to keep in mind both things. Like sometimes the most interesting word is also the funniest choice, or if it's in character, or if it's how that particular lens would view, like a person who has the word vermilion, and if they're viewing the world, they would say that. Now, a different person or a younger person or a person who's not educated would see the same thing and they would say red. And I have to remember who's talking or thinking or looking in that moment of the prose, so that also is, it doesn't have to be my first thought. My first thought is whatever. My second thought is now, and also I always read aloud my versions. My husband's also a science fiction writer, and we just read aloud all the time. And so much of it has to do with mouthfeel, and like if it stops in the air, or like suddenly he looks confused, or like it doesn't make sense, or like you can feel it hanging in the air really heavy, or like a stone, and you're just like, I just actually don't need that. I'm just going to cut all of that. And or like this is a good place to put in something extra. We're really missing this character's presence here. So I have Carlos. I have 2 different little writing groups. I have a lot of good individual writing friends that we read aloud our novels to each other. So it's just, I have an incredible community, and it's built over more than 20 years, because Gene Wolfe took me to my first science fiction conventions. And for the first several years, I was basically a wallflower, but eventually the community does accumulate like an accretion disk, and it's hard to say how, but you do find your people. And also it helps to think of like everyone as your people if possible. And there's many generations that go into conventions there, and it rolls with the times. So it's like a really interesting space to be in. And now I live in New York, which I didn't before, but New York has a very thriving science fiction, fantasy, and horror community. And there's several incredible readings that happen monthly that you can go and just be a part of. Even if you're coming from out of town, you can come visit, and there's several that you can sign up for. So anyway, there's a lot of community here, and I'm able to reap the advantages of it.
That's wonderful. So it sounds like you gush. You translate all of that energy and enthusiasm to just getting everything out on the page. And then you have like internal and external kind of balancing mechanisms, right?
Yeah.
Like you have your own taste, you have your own excitement, And then you have your own army of beta readers, in a sense, your writing group, your husband, your friends, and the science fiction community
Yeah.
that you've built over a couple decades of being involved in all this.
Yeah. And now, I mean, at this point, because of deadlines and because of this point in my career, the other thing I have when I don't have time to access my beta readers, other than my husband and like some individual friends or my mom, she loves when I read aloud. She hears all the drafts. I have an agent and an editor now. So it's like, they're also going to see it pretty soon and give me like the highest level of editorial feedback, which is, unbelievable.
How do you handle it? How do you handle it? Are you sometimes hurt?
Mhm.
Like your heart and soul went into this scene and it just took you where you wanted to go. And then folks are saying, well, maybe a little too much.
I'll tell you two stories. One is my last book. I'd written, I don't know, 10,000 words and sent to my agent. And then he basically said, you started your first book with like everybody dying. and then, and then you went into it. And it was, not necessarily, not as dire as it sounds. It was, but it was also funny. So just think of it more of an Addams Family. Everybody's dying than like something else. Anyway, so he was basically like, you don't start with any stakes whatsoever. Really, I had them all around a kitchen table, like, just family style. I thought they were like subtle stakes and like other things that I was planning on doing, but it wasn't popping for him. So then I start out much more violent and gross in the second book now. But I kind of like, he had a kind of a long email that I was so raw to it that I basically read it once and I couldn't really open it again without feeling really bad. So I kind of wrote a bullet point list of things I remember him saying what it needs. And I could refer to the bullet point list because it was like one step away from reading those actual words. And that I found really helped. But because usually there's like, I don't know, a little bit more I give and take, but maybe for whatever reason that particular email got me. And it doesn't always do that, but that one did. And so I had to deal with it in that moment in a new way. And then when I got the editorial letter after I sent the manuscript, so the second book, because of paper shortages and the nature of publishing, my first book was 180,000 words, and that had been cut down from 210,000 words. So my second book, I turned it in 160,000 words, but I was well aware it was supposed to be 100,000 to 120,000 words. So I was like, I know it's too long. I have some places I know to cut, but I'm not going to do that until I get your editorial letter back. So, and I kind of sat on those thoughts for 3 months. So when I got the editorial letter, I was so happy from my editor that his thoughts almost exactly mirrored mine in what I wanted to cut. And he had two places that I didn't agree with. And I was like, I know I can bring it down from 160,000 to 120,000 without those cuts. But there's a scene in book 2 that more people talk about than any other scene. And it was one of the scenes he suggested cutting. And to be fair, he was like, I would never want to cut this, but I think you could because it doesn't have anything to do really with the plot. And it's a scene where Lainey steps onto a limestone bridge and she can sense the dead. And limestone as a stone is more animal than mineral because it's a bunch of tiny fossils. And so it's like an ecstatic religious experience for her to step on this bridge. And she has this moment and it's really beautiful. And I'm like, I'm not cutting that. I don't care. I will cut everything else in this book. And this book will only be that moment on the bridge. It's that important. And I'm really glad because people bring up the scene all the time. And so those are like, I cut a huge section that was like 20,000 words. It was novella's length that really did a lot of heavy lifting as far as like world building and backstory. And instead I lifted all of that out and I in one half of a chapter, one of the characters tells the other person the story of when they first went into the city, what happened to them, which was basically as if that whole 20,000 words had happened to her in the past. And so she was able to convey some of the things that needed to be known in the next part of the book in a brief like storytelling way. So I was pretty proud of that, though I miss the large section. So there's compromises, and I don't have much time to be precious about that kind of editing right now because this book is due in August, which is very generous because they told me last August that this was my deadline, and I'm very pleased to have the full year. and I'm halfway done, and the holidays are over, and I'm going to have it's going to be a great writing spring and summer. I already know that, but also it is just still August. It's like 2 seconds away. So I would love to give this book its due. I tried to outline, my husband suggested this time I outline for a novella length instead of a novel length, because I will always end up overwriting. So if I'm thinking can I do this plot in 40,000 words, it'll end up being about 100,000 words and everybody will be happy.
So measure expectations and basically go for it in your own way and accept feedback.
Yes.
But push back, like pick your battles, right? And in the one case that you mentioned, you actually you have a good point. I'm going to make it more contextually relevant to the narrative, and then they'll shut up, and then I get my 20,000 words in there.
Yeah. So I was, and if feedback is necessary, but it feels harsh, like I would say, like, don't torment yourself by like going over it again and again. It's like, take what you can from it, but extract it and make it, like, whatever you can do to make it palatable, like to do the work, because so much of it is like self too. You pour yourself into it in your mind, and you have a plan, and then it's the rugs pulled out from under you, and it can feel very startling and raw. And I don't really want writing to be like that. For a long time I was very burnt out and very sour, and like, because I rewrote the first book so many times and I was so sick of it, and like, it was the book that was teaching me how to write a book. I wrote many other things as I was writing that book too, but it was also the one that had gotten rejected over and over again, and it had changed so much, and I was like, will this never end?
Were you rewriting based on feedback?
Sometimes it's like, I started in my late 20s and was published like when I was 40, but the thing is, you change as a writer. I was a very different writer, even so, like, it takes a year and a half to write a draft, and then I'd be like, oh, the next round I was a much better writer. I had a different set of writing group, so there was sometimes feedback, or I'd send it to an agent and then they'd give me feedback contingent upon maybe being my agent, and then I do a huge rewrite. Then I met my husband, and he was in the middle of his fourth draft of his novel, and I was in the middle of my fourth draft, and then he gave me, I was like, woo. And then when I got my agent, he gave me even more feedback. And then when he sold it to Kate, she was so interested in buying it, but contingent on, could I take these edits? So like, by the time, it was like, it's seriously really hard to keep the latest draft in your head when you have all the other 12 drafts. Is like, how do I fix this problem that has now been with me over a decade that I thought was part of the plot? How do I reimagine something from scratch and do it in do it in one chapter versus three? Like, it feels like cutting something open, taking the stuffing out, restitching it in a different color thread. So it's like, it was a very intense process. And at the end of it, I was just like, wow, I just don't want to write again until I want to write. And since I don't want to write right now, I'm not going to force myself. And this alarmed several of my friends. They were like, you can't stop now. I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna. And I really was so happy to look out a window for a few weeks and think, maybe I should get a day job. Like, maybe I should go back to retail work or whatever the things. I'm an audiobook narrator, which is mostly what I do for a living. But I was also just thinking, what if that is it? Because I don't want to force myself anymore. But 2 weeks after that rest, I had my first what if thoughts in years. And it was years because most of the things I've been doing had been revisions of other things that had been begun so long ago, including Desdemona and the Deep and my Darkbreakers work and Saint Death's Daughter and all of that stuff. And I had a fresh thought. And that had been so long. I just looked out the window and I thought, what if houses were people? And then I instead of typing, I just stayed away from my computer. I hand wrote a novella in handwriting by candlelight, and it was such an aesthetic pleasure and delight. And I was like, oh my God. And then a couple months later, I had a really cool story dream. I was like, oh, what if a complete introvert had to go to 3 weddings in one day? But then what if she's a goblin? What if she lived in the Darkbreakers world? Only it's like their equivalent of the 1980s, and the what ifs built. And then suddenly writing was a pleasure. And I sort of got that. I was like, I need to keep it pleasurable no matter what. And that's my choice. And so I've been really trying to change my attitude for several years now about writing, where like, this book, I was determined. This first draft of book 3, this is only going to be a pleasurable experience. Anything to make it pleasurable, I'm trying to do, and that's music, that's candles, that's, I have this little journal of like a world building journal I got at one of the cons that have like these prompts, and sometimes I writing songs about my characters, whatever. Like, I am more interested in it being fun than I am interested in anything else at the moment, because I think that serves the work the best. And it's completely different attitude that I've had, which is really nice, and it really gives energy. And the other thing I did was, for many years I was such a fast writer. I could write 2,000 to 10,000 words a day, depending. And I'm so much slower now. And I kept punishing myself for not reaching what I thought should be my word count. And I saw this wonderful writer, Caldwell Turnbull, talk about, I was having the same problem. And he said, so I just decided to lower the ceiling to the floor. What can I write, he asked himself, in a day without trying? And he said something like 350 words or 500 words, whatever it was. And I was like, I could probably write 350 words just going over the paragraph I wrote the day before. And so I have now a little list of what's my word count and what's the goal, which is always 350 words. And anytime I get more than that, it is a major win. And it's always makes me happy to write the next day rather than feel like a failure. It's always a victory. And it almost always is more than 350 words. And when it's not, it's still a victory because I wrote. And the next day, I always write more than the day before if I do it consistently. So that has been really fascinating from a process wise, because it's all new as far as my process goes. And that's been really fun and interesting to me.
You've reaped what you've sown, which is decades of hard effort, doing what you needed to do, getting feedback, refining your skill. How does it feel when you wake up in the morning? I've got an agent. I've made a name for myself. I've written books that have won awards, are respected. I go to the cons and people recognize me and say, hey, Claire, how does it feel to actually reach this point where you are having a great time with the writing, where you've made that name for yourself that presumably you've always wanted to do? Does it feel good?
I feel like I'm really happy to be having fun with my writing rather than feeling like the death of Thomas Chatterton in a painting where I just want to swallow poison and die. Was major goals. I am so honored by the awards. I've now been a judge on several awards, which, just 2 seconds ago, I was not even a pro rate, but published author. And so it's an interesting thing from being a judge, oh, I'm there now. I'm on the other side, and how different that makes everything look. Because first of all, at least when I judged the World Fantasy Awards with my cohort of judges, what I learned was there is just mountains of genius pouring in right now. That there isn't enough award for the amount of golden glory in this diverse, beautiful, rich writing world we live in. There's not enough publishers for it. There's not enough awards. The table needs to get bigger so we can all sit at it. And so how we had to whittle down was so interesting. We had an agent on our cohort. We had several other writers. We had a librarian, and what everybody read for was slightly different. And how, we had another high editor, C.S.E. Finley, who had edited magazine science fiction and fantasy for years. And the agent and the editor, of course, had read so many manuscripts because of their slush piles and the nature of their work. Whereas I read for pleasure, but I had not read in my genre that copiously ever. And I certainly hadn't, I read in, my concentrations were collections and anthologies. So I got a lot of tastes right in my face. And I normally am a novel reader. So, and then once we whittled down to long lists, then we all read each other's long lists, and we agreed on short lists, and then eventually had to, after much debate, agree on who got the awards. And they don't tell you how to do it. Every cohort of judges basically has to decide for themselves how they want to do it. And that's how we ended up doing it. And I just for me, it's so really it comes down to an opinion of 5 people who have to agree on a certain thing. after reading a lot of things, and that I got an award at all was amazing. That 5 people agreed. Do you know what I mean? After the mountains of stuff they must have read. So I'm just so glad I could please at least 5 people. But that said, I think I like a critical success in a way, and I love that I have my own nom de plume, C.S.E. Cooney, that I can lend it to blurbs for upcoming writers. I can lend it to crowdfunding for things I love, like Locus Magazine, where I now have books to say, I will give these books to you if you support Locus Magazine. Like that's what the worth is that the only worth, I think, is to give back to the community, because what are we without it? So I'm not a best-selling author, and I'm really, most people don't recognize me in the halls unless they've known me for years. So I'm not that kind of face. I know people like that and I adore them, but I'm not really famous on that level, and I don't really have an ambition to be. But I have everything as a writer that I daydreamed of in my teens. So I need, in some ways, like my new ambitions, which is what I'm working on now, is sustainability, how to go deeper, what's still interesting, what do I really want to say, what's in conversation with what's being said in the genre, what is weird, like my ambitions aren't really, I guess, material, partly because when I was younger, they had to be, because I was in debt up to my eyeballs because of college, working a $10 an hour job. Like I thought a book would save me. If I finished this book, it would get me out of debt. Possibly, eventually I could get a house, like all of those things. I'm in a totally different, at the moment, material, different, all my needs are met basically because I have an incredible husband who's a professor in New York, and that is like nothing I had anything to do with. I'm an actor and a writer, and I'm still sort of like, if I didn't have him, I'd be living with 4 roommates in Rhode Island, and I'd be very happy. But at the moment, I am here. I'm in New York, and I'm an actor and a writer, and I get these jobs, and it's a huge privilege. And so, what can I give back? Because I have more than enough. And I guess that's where I'm at as an artist right now.
That's lovely to hear. And to your point, a lot of people are trying to break in, right? You've got a tsunami of a lot of talent, petabytes of content. What was the moment where you cracked it? Like, what was that magic moment? Did you get an email from an agent inquiring? There must have been that epiphany where, wow, I got my break. What was that like for you?
2017 was an interesting year. It was the year I got married. And right around that time was also when I got the letter from my agent, Marcus. And I'd been submitting Saint Death's Daughter, which did not have that title originally, for several years. And Marcus Hoffman of Regal Hoffman and Associates, when he wrote, it was more like a conversation. There's no contract or anything, where he was saying, you look through your slush to find something like this, like a jewel. And I'd love to be in conversation with you about editorial. Like, if you're open to what I have to say, if you like the way we work together. It was very gentle. He's European, and he's a surfer, and he's a trumpet player, and he lives in New York and Brooklyn, and he's very cool and very international. And I really liked that, and very calm. And one of the pieces of advice I was given by some incredible writer friends, Ellen Kushner and Delia Sherman, when I was thinking of going with another agent earlier, they were like, Claire, you don't need to have an agent who's more high strung than you are. And so I remembered that with Marcus, who is just super cool, super urbane, loves cake, and cheese, and seemed to love my writing, and that, like, I'm very eager to be in collaboration. So I think that was one thing. But remember, then I had to write, it took me 1.5 to 2 years to write the manuscript up to his specs before he would submit it. And so there were still years before, like, it was a breakthrough. And I feel like that's more what it's been. It's like my first prorate sale was a breakthrough. my first rejection slip at all that had personal commentary was a breakthrough, because in Stephen King's book on writing, I read any personal commentary is better than boilerplate. It means you're close. But it was still years before my first sale versus my first prorate sale. But you know, as you have your first prorate sale, and suddenly if you're $10 an hour and you're going to the food bank for groceries, and you're just, everything is library, and you're just making very serious choices between rent and paying your college debt and all of those things that happen for many of us, most of us, I would say. But then suddenly you sell a poem or a short story and it, you know, pays the utilities that month. That is one of the biggest breakthroughs, to be able to pay for something with this thing that you're like, why did I get a college degree in something so frivolous? I was constantly berating myself for frivolity, but both my parents, in their different ways, in their different households, always said, follow your bliss, you know, which is so different than be practical, get a job, have a savings account. And I always did. I just like, I would rather live on poverty's edge and write and be happy. That was just sort of like, I guess, like kind of like the pre-Raphaelite bohemian thing, but I was encouraged in that by these beautiful, loving parents. And so like, then the next breakthrough was I was invited into a writing group. When I moved to Rhode Island, it was a New York writing group, so I would kind of commute in because it was easy. It's just 3.5 hours, but it had all these, like Ellen Kushner, Delia Sherman. It was only alive for a hot second, but it was Kat Valenti, Lev Grossman, Kat Howard, and Theodora Goss. And these were all people who were way above me in their careers. And I was like, why did they invite me? I don't know, you know, but it was like one step further into this space that I never expected to find myself. And I just kept thinking, when my cohort of friends, and we started going to cons together, it was Emel El-Motar and Caitlin Paxson, Nicole Corner-Stace, Patty Templeton, Julia Rios, Jessica Wick. And we were like, let's, instead of doing solo readings at these, let's see if we can do group readings, because we might get 1 to 10 people at a solo reading. But if we do a group reading of 4 or 5, we might get 20 to 30 people in the room for all of us combined. Our whole idea was we'll rise together. And I think really like that was our mid-20s, and now we're all in our 40s. And in many ways we have, in different ways, and at different, not all of us go to cons anymore, and we're not always in the same circles anymore, but that was something we did deliberately, and I think beautifully. And that was something that I wouldn't have thought at the moment that's a breakthrough, but I think that's the biggest breakthrough of like, don't just look out for yourself. Try not to treat people like commodities, invite, I don't know, being community volunteer, that sort of thing, like those things that you don't think of as breakthroughs in your career, but really are keystones in being part of something that is not just a career, but also it's a way of life. Being in the science fiction fantasy community, it's a large conversation. It's ongoing. It changes, and it changes with each civil rights movement, and with with all the political storms that are happening. Like that, this is an artistic art. My husband says is the long conversation, and that's what we're engaged in on a international level, and it's, you have to be alive to it, I think. So there's lots of different breaking through points. And when Kate Coe, who was my editor for Saint Death's Daughter, sent me the acceptance letter, that was huge. Like, oh, it actually is happening, this real thing that was decades in the making. And ever since then, it's like every new thing is unexpected and a breakthrough. But there are many, many levels above me that I haven't yet attained, and maybe won't, but maybe will. I'm interested in it. On what Carlos and I tell each other is that we couldn't have imagined 10 years ago this moment. We can't imagine 10 years from now. One of our favorite writers, Martha Wells, who was a big part of the Blackgate Magazine community back when I was editing their blog, and I'd read her novels, like Death of a Necromancer, Element of Fire. I'd read her short stories in Blackgate Magazine. And then I'd read all her Raksura books, which had been published by a sort of medium small press. And it had fallen through the cracks, and different vagaries of small press publishing happened to it. And I'd heard that she was sort of like, I don't know, maybe I should stop writing. maybe that's the end. I don't know. And then Murderbot comes out, and she's shot into these echelons, and she's been writing since the 80s or the 90s. And like, she could never have anticipated that in her 50s and 60s, suddenly that. And that Carlos and I say, like, if at any point any of us stop writing, that will never happen. And if we want it to happen, the only chance of it ever happening or something like it, our version of it, is just to keep going. And that's if we even want that. But also, I'm a huge proponent of, if you're tired and burnt out, you're allowed to stop. I just want to say that to people too, because I think that it's good to rest. And this world is so interesting and full of things to be and do, that that's also okay to just find your other loves for a while,
Where did the burning desire come from? Do you have like writer's DNA? Are there series of nucleosides in the polymers of your family? Other family members are writers. Where did it come from? You mentioned you were writing when you were really young.
My dad is
Draft after draft. You've been going nonstop.
my dad is a liturgical musician. I sometimes I call him a poet laureate of God. He's a very incredible literary. He's like a poet and lyricist and musician, incredible mind, and very devoted in his faith. And has been, he was, when he was younger, he was in the seminary. Then he married my mom, and then they separated. But he's been in the Catholic Church for a very long time, and his kind of like great brain for beauty and poetry and ritual is there. And then my mom, when she was younger, she would write. She was a sort of person. Do you know the show The Monkees? Yeah, she would write like fanfic about the monkeys, what we call fanfic now. She would just fill notebooks, and she wrote poetry, and she's also very crafty. Like, anything she sets her hand to, she can. She's a gardener. She's always said that her art as an artist is her children. Very incredible. We call her the Great Earth Mother, and she was always the theater mom for when we had the theater cast. We always had cast parties at our house. She was just an abundance of like artistic fertility and supportive. Like, even a couple years ago, I put on a sci-fi musical here in New York, and she flew all the way out here just to see it, and she does that, and she'll do that for little cousins, and she'll do that for nieces and nephews, but she doesn't want to miss a thing that we do. She's always like the world's best audience and first reader. And, to have that at all is like, that listener, that other voice, that person who just, like, I won't say things you can do no wrong. She just always loved whatever we did. And then if something wasn't quite right, she'd be like, I was imagining it the whole time except that one part, and I couldn't quite visualize it. And then she'll identify, and she'll of course poo-poo what she does, like, oh, I'm not a writer, but she's incredible, like, in a resource. So, and like a great, I think, a poetic mind. They're both huge readers, and they read to us. And just like, one of my brothers is a rapper and a songwriter. Another brother is a musician. I've got another brother who was a poet and is an actor. And I've got a brother who has written several horror novels and short stories. And I've got another brother who, I don't know, is also a visual artist. So I've got lots of brothers. They're gorgeous. I love them. But we're all theater kids and singers, and they just steeped us in it. And that, I guess that's the DNA, both nature and nurture. But I was allowed to, I guess what they say in Montessori, I went to Montessori preschool, but like, follow the child. They just like let me follow what I needed to do. And I had other chores and other things, and they kept trying to get me interested in the world and real things, science and family. And they had to kind of pull me out of my head a lot, I think. But I'm really grateful they did now, because I was not happy at the time. I was like, let me be behind the couch reading a book. And they were like, nope, it's family time to sing happy birthday, And I think that was really important that they did that too.
They have this huge support structure, internal and external. Sounds like your family artists, creative people, very expressive.
Yeah.
And then you've created a community, and you've integrated yourself in the sci-fi community and fantasy.
Right. And the community existed long before me. And like people like Jean and Ellen and Delia, there were so many older mentors who just kept inviting. And so almost from the time where I stepped into the community, I realized that it was going to be my job to also just keep doing that, and not always knowing how to do it, because when you're still new, there's always someone slightly newer than you, and you don't always know the way or what the right or proper way it is. So we're all play testing all the time how to be better in community. So, I think as long as we keep trying, it's difficult too, like when you want to be inviting, but you're also like building a community and you're making friends and you want to pay attention to them, and sometimes you don't see what's on the outside or what's behind you. And so I just think that we can all be very forgiving of each other and try to be as open as possible, and know that we're going to be flawed and failing sometimes, but that's sort of goals. I'm taking this year off cons as much as possible because I've done some double con duty the last several years of going to gaming conventions as well as writing conventions, and that's a lot of con for me. And so I told my husband, not this year. I don't have a book out. We don't have a game coming out. You can go to cons all you want, but I'm going to stay home and I have a deadline. And he's like, all right, but what about Gen Con? So we are going to Gen Con, but I'm like, that's it. That's the only one I'm going to go to. If you want to go, I'll go with you, but I'm going to take a writing retreat in the hotel room and not join things. And I have to keep saying it over and over again because it's our way of life. We've done the con circuit for years, but I know I need a break. Because everybody does. You get to have breaks.
Yeah, they're draining. I was at LA Comic Con and Pasadena Comic Con. I'm in California, and it's super fun, but it can be really, really tiresome. It takes a lot out of you.
Yeah.
So before we get into gaming, you mentioned gaming, and I want to hear a lot about your gaming exploits. Within the science fiction and fantasy community, what are some of the centers of influence and excellence? I know, Locus Magazine, Apex. There's a handful of publications, and I know it's evolved from traditional media, print, Asimov's magazine, where a lot of the early icons of science fiction, fantasy, and horror really got their toehold.
Yeah.
And it's become digital, and it's evolved in so many ways. And now it just seems kind of chaotic and wild. How do you feel about it? Where is that center of gravity?
I think there's lots of centers, and there's more too. I mean, like, again, people can start magazines and anthologies, and there's a new, the Kickstarter model allows for short-term projects. Like during COVID, my friend Julia Rios, who had been an editor at Strange Horizons, had said that when they were at Strange Horizons, they would get a lot of mermaid stories, but you can only publish one mermaid story basically a year, or you'll become that mermaid magazine. So during COVID, Julia Rios and Meg Frank were like, let's do that mermaid magazine and all mermaid stories all the time. And then discovered or rediscovered that thing about, if you're doing mermaid stories or Persephone stories, a lot of them have similarities in that the sea is often a human metaphor for drowning or depression or sadness, and especially during COVID. So they had to really balance what mermaid intake they were taking in, because so often they're used as these metaphors for like a life that feels out of control or sad. So I guess I want to say that in that there's like lots of small projects and like anthologies that are made out of love. Like there's this incredible little press called Errand Nothingness Press that's based in Pittsburgh, and he does these maybe 2 or 3 projects a year, and he does these tiny gorgeous little books, these anthologies that have the most beautiful like heavy paper and like these covers that just feel really good and like really high quality. And he has a submission process, but he often seeks out authors, and then he will do these like small runs of 200 or so, all Kickstarter backed. They're all paid for by the time they come out, and it's just so beautiful. And it's somebody, and he pays pro rates, so it's this micro press but incredibly high quality. And so you've got that sort of thing, and then you've got the magazines like Uncanny Magazine. Strange Horizons is huge magazine of fantasy and science fiction. Apex, yes, I think The Dark. Clarkesworld is still really huge. and Asimov's is still in the world, like it's still is a long time established, and I think still has a print presence too, as well as fantasy and science fiction. One of the great upcoming magazines that began maybe 5 years ago is FIA Literary Magazine, it's Black Speculative SFF, which is like so incredible and important. And so there's just and that's, and then there's like the audio only ones, Cast of Wonders. So it's all under, not Escape Pod. It's Escape Pod, Pseudopod, Podcastle, and Cast of Wonders are all under Escape Artists. They're all short form the audio dramas, or like audio books, but they're audio stories of short stories, and sometimes short stories that were written exclusively for audio, and sometimes reprints of things that appeared in other magazines. And it's really that, I think that's really interesting and important, because it's not something we had the structures for in the 20th century, and now we have the structures. And with, I think, like, this podcast is so important, and having a ways, like LeVar Burton did several seasons of LeVar Burton Reads, and he was choosing incredible science fiction stories to reprint as audio works that are calling on his Reading Rainbow Times, but also really engaged with the short stories of the 21st century. And just knowing that I mean, like, those are just some of them. Locus is a great industry magazine. They're going to have their crowdfunding soon, and I'm just like super always want to support them. But Gene Wolfe told me a long time ago, he said, writers who aren't subscribing to the magazines they're submitting to are cutting their own throats. It was such a strong visual. And so even though subscription models are changed now, I always try to keep that in mind. It's that, and even if I'm not submitting a lot of short stories right now, I want other young writers who may not be able to afford to subscribe or to help the crowdfunding efforts. I still want the magazines to be available for them to submit to. And should I ever return or have a science fiction or horror story, like I want this community to thrive on all the levels that it can, even if I'm busy writing novels and I'm not doing a lot of short stories. So I guess that's just like, you get to choose what responsibilities you want, and there's only so much time and energy, so you kind of choose where to focus it. And there's like the small local SFF conventions, and then there's the like larger ones that are more industry oriented, and then there's the huge things like Comic-Con, which have a few aisles that are dedicated to writers or artists, and it's a different vibe. Like, not everybody's there for that, but there are enough people at a Comic-Con that there will be a contingent there for that. And so it also just depends on where you want to throw your net. I think it's important to, I hate the word networking exactly. I told Gene that once, and he's like, all networking means is making friends. And that really helped me put that into my own context, because I couldn't imagine myself like walking up to someone at a bar and saying, so, hey, how about my manuscript? But I could imagine being friendly to somebody, and that would be okay, So yeah, I think that I think that one way to do this thing is to make friends and be in community and support other people's projects, and then submit to them sometimes, or if you know somebody, sometimes they're like, hey, you're a writer, and they'll just invite you. That's kind of how I got in some of my first anthologies, was on like road trips when we're all crammed together in a car going to a convention, and you got some people, I'm gonna do this anthology, you should be in it. And I'm like, well, you don't even know me, you don't know how I write, but okay. That stuff just kind of happens when you're around and you're hearing the conversation. So but centers of influence, it's hard to say. I think that New York has a big concentration of editors and agents and writers, but it's so funny. It's like, even living here, I don't know all of them by name, and sometimes everybody does, and they're like, oh, so and said so and I saw so and so the other day, and I'm like, I should know all of these people, but I actually don't. Just sort of nod along. But that's sort of, I think, like, there's different levels to every community too.
Yeah, I love that, just making friends.
Yeah.
At LA Comic-Con, I set up the booth. I was with my writer friend Ingrid Moon, and then another writer, S.A. Gibson, puts together the anthology every year. And he gave me his card. I
Yeah.
submitted a short story, and that was my first inclusion in an anthology. And it was basically just, hey, bro, how are you?
Yeah.
And then just, you want to submit? And I said, hey, sure. And, if I wouldn't have been at the con, I wouldn't have met him. And it was an interpersonal kind of thing, like, hey, how
Exactly.
you doing? Meet members of your tribe, and
Exactly.
then just share and go for it. It's really a lot of fun to do that.
And there's cons like World Fantasy and Stoker Con that are in a different place every year. So sometimes World Fantasy is going to be on the West Coast, and I would say go for it.
Yeah.
I know there's a couple conventions in the Northwest that you might be able to drive to more easily, like in Washington or Oregon, that are more local. But there's probably some very local California cons that are small, but it would be the local writers that you would be able to meet.
Yeah, I've teamed up with a few other writers to go to the LA Book Festival, LA Festival of Books. So we have this little tent kind of set up, and we're going to kind of represent like the sci-fi section at the LA Festival of Books. So
I've heard some great things also about the Tucson Book Festival as well, which is in the early part of the year. I've had some friends, and Carlos at one point was invited, but that was COVID year. But they're super impressed by it, and that would just be a 5.5 hour drive for LA people. I used to live in Phoenix, so it might be a fun road trip some long weekend.
So we see how publishing and networking has kind of grown and evolved. How has the content changed? Do you see any discernible difference? Like, you've been at it for so long, just decades now.
I think it's
Is quality better? Is quality worse? Is there a trend toward, if you look at the numbers, like romantic sci-fi and kind of ghost romance is hot right now.
yeah, I don't care what's hot right now. I whatever I think is hot is probably already passe. I'm not an editor, so I'm really not on the cutting edge of that. Whatever I'm reading was probably published last year or 3 years ago. My TBR pile is so big. I'm a little clueless. I just I love that there are trends and tropes, but editors are going to be much better. I just think from when I was a judge reading the stuff that was submitted for World Fantasy, that the quality, the level of sentence level, the experimental, and the diversity, I think is phenomenal. And I feel like what the 21st century is doing better than the 20th century is inviting more inclusivity in the submission pool. But it's a systemic thing. We need editors and readers and slush readers and publishers who are also of a more diverse pool. Just like that's what's going to keep everything alive and invigorated. And the writings from different cultural backgrounds and different perspectives. That's not kind of the great white writers of the mid 20th century in all genres and many male. It's not like that it shouldn't also still be included, but just there's a ton more that needs to be included, and there's more now than there was, and there's not enough yet. So that is like whatever's happening, that's what I'm hoping for. And that can be any genre, that can be all the genres smashed. There can be tropes upon tropes. I don't care, as long as everybody gets to write, publish, edit, make money, make a living wage, or everybody should just have a living wage and then be able to make whatever art they want. However we end up doing it, I just feel like I think that there needs to be more inclusion, and it has to be on every level of this system that doesn't quite have all those gears in place and need
100%. And speaking of diversity, there's a new species on the planet, which is AI, whether we like it or not. I have to ask you about your feeling about AI in terms
I don't
of.
believe it's intelligent. It's a large language model, and it has scraped most writers and artists I know their work, copyrighted work, without permission. So it's pirated all of our work, and
that is true.
it's taking it's not just human resources, but the planet's resources. It's burning them up. It is. I think it is I think the question of why we write different than why the tech bros want to use AI to make money writing. And I feel like this is going to be one of the great, interesting questions of the world is like, you can write the worst sentence in the world, but it's yours and it comes from a struggle and it's going to feel hard. And you're going to compare it to what an AI sentence can do. And you're going to feel bad about it as a young writer, but your bad sentence is infinitely more precious than all of the AI slop that has scraped the work of a million writers before you. And you don't fucking need that. Sorry, I said the F word, but like.
No, that's all right. I already have explicit because
Okay.
we've F-bombed here. So go ahead, especially given this context. Go for it.
My husband's a professor of English. He's got all these young writers, often writers who are coming in from different languages, and different cultural backgrounds who don't believe and have never been given any encouragement in their writing, and who are so scared and now have this tool that's like a superpower. And what we need to teach them is that superpower doesn't even matter. Like, what matters is the struggle. Like, it matters that it's hard, and it matters that it's from them, and that's actually the most interesting and wonderful part. That's the miracle. That's the weirdness, and that's the human condition. And that is just fabulous. And like, somebody's pencil drawing that they do in Inktober of a bird that looks like chicken scratch is infinitely more precious than anything Midjourney can come up with, no matter how cool it is. And I get the seduction of it, but it costs too much. And it's not just the planet's resources, though that alone is too much of a cost. It costs too much of us, our cognitive load, our ability to think, our ability to like sit with that struggle. And like, I sat years with a struggle and with the burnout, and yet to come on the other side and be like, how weird writing is. It is so weird we even do this. Why would we? And yet the pleasure is so palpable and delightful. And like, if you don't do that, you can't get to this point either. And people maybe don't want to. So there has to be a way to be like, your thoughts are individual and alone of everybody's, of the billions of people in this world, and they matter. And AI doesn't. The large maybe it does for establishing patterns in certain kind of medical practices, or maybe it will after a lot more like testing. But I think it's too fast. It's being forced on people, and it has too many mistakes in it. It hallucinates, and it is not intelligent. And it's going to gum up a lot of works. And I think there's going to be a huge cost in actual lives, maybe in places where AI is infiltrating the law and infiltrating medicine, specifically law and medicine, the things that actually cost people's lives. But it also, on this very small scale of art, I mean, of course, I don't actually think it's small. I think it's large, but I am also very aware that I'm an artist. So of course I do. It's all very hyperbolized, but you have a team of 3 people at a small press or a magazine doing all the work. They already were getting, say, 200 to 2,000 submissions from real people a month, and now it's 10,000. That team of 3 people can't handle that. That everybody loses. That magazine will no longer exist. That load has crushed them, and that is gone. And that is like, tech bros are going to make no money from them either. Like, it's just, will be crushed under that weight. And it was already hard enough with 200 people submitting a month. It was already hard. So I'm interested to see where it goes. I'm also a voice actor, and now there's a lot of AI narrators doing a lot of the backlog that I was being hired for. Do I love that? No. Do I love that you're taking a dead woman's voice like Judy Garland's, or taking the hundreds of hours I've spent narrating and like taking the best of that and then applying it in this dull non-interpretation? It cannot interpret text. It just can echo what has gone before. Do I think that's awesome? No. I think it's interesting technologically, but it is taking actual like livelihoods away. And that's life. That's like a life or death cost ultimately. Maybe not for me, but for other actors and other writers and other artists in the world. It's like the difference between rent and not rent. And I've been there. And that is eating or not eating, or feeding your children or not feeding them, or having enough money to go to an emergency visit in the hospital. Like, that's what AI is doing, and I hate it. So yes, I've ranted.
No, that's fine, and it's probably welcome to the ears and eyes of our listeners and viewers. And it's been likened to the beginning of the COVID epidemic, where in the early stages we were all in this state of denial. That can't happen here. It's not really going to impact our lives. And to your point, it's going to be sweeping, and this is really just the beginning. So, as a creative person, what are you going to do about it? And I think to your great point, just keep doing what you've been doing, which is it comes from here. It's hard, it's a struggle, and it's just so satisfying.
Yeah. It's like,
Let it all out.
That Mary Oliver, what are you going to do with your one precious life? You know, like,
right.
I think people who are compelled to write will still write. I think I don't want to harsh anybody's buzz either. I think that there's, I know artists who really love what they call collaborating with LLMs. And I just want to support people creating anything in any way. And I get really sad that I can't be 100% enthusiastic about it. Like, I don't want to judge anybody else's creative life. I don't think it's my place. I just think it's a larger human scale problem. But I also thought it was a problem when, like, friends and family members were pirating music, you know, and downloading huge things. Like, I was like, you know, our dad is a musician, and our mother's, like, you know, wedding, like, the divorce payments, I forget what they're called, you know, that she got annually, that helped us, you know, have new clothes or go to the doctor's office, comes directly from his royalties. And people who pirate music are taking that away. You know, like, this is like just us and our little family and what's happening. But what you're doing affects other people's families, you know, and affects, and that's like people, and even my brothers would just like roll their eyes. They're like, yeah, we just want the music and it's there to have, you know, like, why shouldn't we have what we want when it's at our fingertips and it's so easy? And I feel like, you know, so self-righteous and judgy, and I hate feeling like that, but I have a strong opinion, you know, and but it's not always welcome, and it's not always listened to. So we just kind of pick and choose your battles and speak out when you can. But I don't know that always speaking out is always necessary, because it might take energy that is just thrown against a brick wall. Like, there have to be other ways and other venues other than just ranting, which sometimes is good and sometimes isn't. It just depends on who you're debating with and if they're debating in good faith, I guess.
Yeah, and back to the COVID analogy, it's going to play itself out. You could be like Chicken Little and say the sky's coming down, but until it actually does and people don't actually feel the impact, what can you do? Just keep doing what you're doing, right?
Yeah, and I think there are things we can do. I think watching what academics is doing is interesting, and how some professors are embracing it and some professors are railing against it. And there's, like, I think there's larger institutional discussions that are being had in the halls of academia and in politics, and great systems of power. And the artists, my visual artist friends, when they were seeing what was happening with Midjourney, were calling out loudly. And at the beginning of Midjourney, we were playing with it until we started reading more and more of, like, these artists' anguish and, like, how scared they were. And we were like, oh, all right, I guess we're not going to play with that anymore. And then our work as writers started being scraped. And then there's now AI that can, like, set your song to music in the style of a country music and with a country music singer. And that's sort of like, I'm participating in FALM this year, February Album Writing Month, and there's some musicians who are collaborating so that the lyrics they write or the music that they've composed, they can just run it through a machine and have it immediately play something. And there's other musicians who are like, I'm not touching that. I will not collaborate with somebody who's collaborating with AI. And so there's a lot of people drawing lines in the sand. And, you know, part of me, since I have melodies in my head, but I don't have music theory, it's sort of like, I'd love to be able to, like, hum a tune and have AI create, like, a whole symphony for me. And you know, either I sing it or somebody else. It would be so cool to write a whole musical in a night, but actually it also disgusts me and repulses me at the same time that I feel that longing. And so I have to sit with that. And I'm just like, I'll be lyrics only then, or I'll record a demo of the melody on my phone voice memos that's a cappella in the bathtub. And that's what I have. And it doesn't sound great. It doesn't sound professional, but it is actually what I can do. And if I want to collaborate, I will find a musician who has gone to school for music and has a guitar or a piano or a clarinet and who wants to work with me in a human way. That's not going to be for everyone, but I know that if I want to do that, that's the way I want to do. That's the way I want to be in the world. And I can't tell anybody else to be like that, you know.
Yeah, it's great to keep it real. And you're doing gaming too, and gaming is another area where AI is starting to get its mitts in there.
I don't know much about, all of my game designer friends are so like hands-on with the iterations, like they making things out of 3x5 cards and like playing with scraps at the table. And maybe AI is infiltrating on like a video game designer level. I'd have to ask some of my video.
Oh, it very well is. Tell us about your game. You're working on it with Carlos, your husband. Is that right?
It's out already. It came out last year. We worked on it for several years.
Okay. Tell us about that. I'm sure that's an aspect that a lot of listeners and viewers don't know about you.
Gosh, it's a tabletop role-playing game. But when I first married Carlos or got together with him, he's been doing TTRPGs since he was 9 years old. He loves D&D. He loves, but not just D&D, he loves board games and card games and other role-playing games that are not a D&D, like Fiasco is a huge one for him. The Jason Morningstar's stuff. There's like Kids on Bikes. There's lots of mechanics. Powered by the Apocalypse is another set of mechanics by which you build characters and make decisions. So here I come in. I'm like, look, I'm a novel writer and I'm a voice actor. I already do those things for work. You want me to do that for playtime too? Like, no, thank you. And he just got really like big heart eyes and full of longing. And he's like, what if I designed a game that you would like to play? And so as we were talking about this over the years, he had this initial mechanic idea for a set of cards about the size of like a tarot deck, but they would have like images from world history art. So famous paintings, right? And then on like across, let's say, Da Vinci's, I don't know, like David or something, you know, like there would be a weird saying like even the stones sing on the last night of the world, like a weird saying with David in all his sculpted glory, and then like a suit in the corner, like a bone or a heart. So he just had like, he made this deck of cards out of publicly available art in the public domain. And he made up a couple like weird phrases, and he took them to the Met when we met a couple friends, Meg Frank and Fran Wild. Fran Wild's another writer. Meg Frank's a visual artist. And he just laid out some cards for them. He like laid out 3, and he said, make a character using these 3 cards. So they interpreted these cards, the art plus the weird phrase, and then they would create characters from like how they would interpret the images. So, and it was already fun as a basic mechanic. So he brought it back to me, and we made a bigger deck. So we made a deck with different suits, and we thought the suits could be the things that make a human body. So blood, like sangre, bone, hueso, flesh, carne, the spark of life, lightning, rayo, lagrimas, tears or salt water, and bone, flesh, blood. Let's see. There's another one. Anyway, there's 6 things. We were sort of thinking like Terry Pratchett's Wintersmith, where they said, what maketh a man? Like iron enough to fill a nail. So we did our 6 things. Oh, breath, aire, breath. So there were 6 things that maketh a human. And then our friend, who's a tattoo artist in Chicago, had broken her non-dominant arm, her left arm, horseback riding. She's an incredible artist. She's right-handed, but you need 2 hands to tattoo. And so she was like, oh my God, my mortgage. And we were like, hey, we have a project for you. So we gave her the list of all of our weird sayings. There were 60 of them. So 6 suits, 10 cards in a suit. Or maybe at that point it was 9 cards in a suit. So we wanted to be able to match a regular deck of cards. So anyway, she did images based on these these words and on the suit, and we'd be like, all right, so we want them kind of black and white, but with one color, and that color would be also part of the suit. So aire is blue, rayo is orange, carne is brown, sangre is red, that sort of thing. And so then we suddenly had a deck of these cards with these bespoke images that were very weird and our weird sayings on them. And that was like, we had a deck to be the main mechanic of how to build a character. You interpret these cards. How to create a relationship. You draw a card and the both of you interpret it between them. How to build a world. You ask a question like, what's weird about the water? You draw a card and it might have a woman looking out a window with a pen in her hand and saying how perfect the poem before it is written. You might interpret the card and be like, the water makes people talk in rhyming couplets, or whatever you come up with. So, and then we started talking about what kind of world we wanted to write in. We wanted to write in a world that was not influenced by an England or like a Proto-European, like Germanic. So Carlos is from a Cuban background. He's like, what if it's Spanish influenced, circa the Spanish Inquisition, but not in this world? So we came up with this idea of a game called Negocios Infernales, Infernal Bargains is how it's translated, where you're playing a wizard in the court of a queen in a place called Espada, which means blade in Spanish. It's a world very much like our world. And she's about to sign religious persecution into law. Then the aliens come. And they're like, no, humans, forget the Prime Directive. Don't kill each other anymore. We'll give you phenomenal cosmic powers and invite you to join the cosmic consciousness if you just don't sign this into law. And the queen is like, oh, look at those dealy boppers. They must be horns. These must be devils. Okay, I'll make a bargain with these devils for infernal powers. So you're playing somebody who thinks they've bargained with a devil for infernal powers, but you've bargained for alien powers with a kind of benevolent species that doesn't want to hurt each other. So you're playing in a kind of cosmic ironic situation. And then there's different things you can play out. But instead of dice, the main mechanic is this weird deck of cards that you draw and interpret for the decisions. And it ended up being, we didn't have enough. The first set of 56 wasn't enough to play the game. So we added one card to each of the suits, and then we added a whole other suit called Espacio, space, which is if the first 6 suits are what maketh a human, then Espacio is everything outside of the human, that the potential, what we can reach for, technology, hope, a different kind of philosophy, that sort of thing. So that's the 7th suit. So now it's this deck of 70 cards. And so it comes in this box and it has really cool character sheets and world building sheets. And there's a great rule book with a comic that Beck, our artist, did at the front, that sort of sets up the world and everything. And then it comes with not only the tarot size deck of cards, but for every section of the game, these mini decks that are sort of like the invocation. There's the character creation deck, the relationships deck, the world building deck, which is 40 cards that ask questions like, what is the main import of Espada? Or what is weird about Espada's water? Or what is the great crime in Espada's past that it keeps having to spin as something else? And basically every time you play, each character chooses one world building question to answer and interpret the answer, but there's 40 of them. So like every Espada is going to feel the same, but be completely different than the last Espada. And that's what's been really cool to watch, is it always feels like the world we built. And yet every game is entirely different, very wacky. It's very goofy. There's 7 plots that we provide, 1 plot per each of the suits. And there's an alien epilogue at the end. And there's, because it was my first role-playing game, and I was very clear about, wait, you people who play D&D, you just play for hours and hours and hours and you don't know where it's going to end, and you just keep playing and you drink Mountain Dew and eat cereal. Like, no, I need a countdown mechanic. I need to know the game is ending even as you're playing it. So that's why we did each card, like little card decks for each of the sections. So like once you've done the invocation, it's cleared off. Once you've done character creation, and you can see the decks going down as you're doing it. And then finally, when you're at the role-playing part, which is the 6th of 7th, then you have like a countdown mechanic of a sword, where every time you fail a magic check, you have a coin move down a sword. And if it gets to the hilt, terrible things happen, game over, you didn't win, but also it's really fun not to win. And if you get all your orders accomplished before the coin reaches the hilt, then great things happen. And then you do the alien epilogue where you all pretend you're the aliens looking down on these wizards that you gave powers to, and you're judging them. Like, how did they do? Do they join the cosmic consciousness? Usually the answer is no, because they misunderstood everything. These poor wizards. So that's kind of the game. Negocios Infernalis, it came out last August at Gen Con, and this year, in lieu of going to a lot of conventions, we're planning a lot of like mini tours of places where we have friends who have relationships with their game stores, and we want to go and run the game for their friends and talk to game store owners and just establish friendly relationships and show them what the game's about, because we just had so much fun writing it. And separate from the game, at conventions and at libraries and at schools, what we've done is taken just the deck of cards, and what we do these things called infernal salons, where everybody gets a prompt of 1 to 3 cards. We set a timer for 20 minutes. Everybody sits down and makes whatever they want in those 20 minutes. Sometimes it's art, sometimes it's poetry or songs, sometimes it's they're working on their novel and they just let the cards influence the next direction of their novel. Sometimes they start short stories, sometimes they write entire plays. And then at the end of 20 minutes, there's usually like an hour and a half where we have people come up to the mic and just read aloud what they did. And it's instant, like everybody has made that, whatever they made in that same time. And you get to see all kinds of process, how some people bullet point things out. Some people are so fast, they finish a complete draft of something. Some people are just like, this is a concept of like, this is what I'm thinking of, but it started something. And that has been the most, for me, one of the most incredible parts of creating this game is having this deck that does this other thing. And especially in the wake of COVID, in the wake of like people being so burnt out or like locked in themselves, watching that unfold and that creativity and that community and that kind of like body doubling that is sometimes as big as a whole room, watching that energy at work is really cool. Like, we love that about the game.
Sounds super fun. And then it's available retail. People
Yeah.
could click and buy it.
Yeah, it's at Outland Entertainment. So Outland Entertainment sells comic books and games, and they're wonderful people. Like a small, kind of like a small press, a game press and comics press that has a brick and mortar store in Kansas City, Missouri. So they also sell games there as well. So if you're Kansas City local, go and check them out. They're awesome. But yeah, Outland Entertainment is you can just find them online. Negocios.
We'll put the link. We'll put the link in the description.
Yeah,
Right.
If you just look up Negocios Infernalis, it's right there. You can buy it. And there's like all the other little goodies you can buy. Like we've got like stickers and postcards with some of the card art on them, and a little enamel pin with the Espada like regalia that says Vida Corter Honor Eterno, something like that. Carlos was in charge of the Spanish, so, but it's really fun. We use Spanish more as like flavoring too, because in a lot of the old fantasies, like it's often Latin that's used. So he just did it like an old florid style of Spanish on the maps, where people who speak Spanish get a lot out of it. People who don't, it is as kind of like decorative as a lot of like Latin spells are in fantasy. So you don't need to know Spanish to enjoy the game, but people who know Spanish are going to have a rich experience as well.
Sounds like a really, really good time.
Yeah.
So it's a semi-guided role-playing experience with the cards.
GM-less, so you don't need somebody to spend 8 hours prepping. Like in D&D,
Right.
a GM has an incredible, hard job, and it's such a gift that they give. And by the way, I now love D&D, so all my making fun of it, I was wrong. D&D is so fun, but I had to learn that because I had to have this experience first. But this is definitely a game for people who've never role-played before, like me, and a game for people like Carlos who've been role-playing their whole lives. So it's sort of like a threshold game. It's an invitation in game. Somebody needs to have just read the rule book so they kind of know how to guide people through, but the little card decks are supposed to really help with that. We have a quick start guide. So once you play it once, it's pretty easy to like guide your group through, but you don't have to be the GM. You're not in charge. It's collaborative. Everybody shares all the information with each other.
How long is the game? Let's say you fire it up.
We usually say for it's usually about 45 minutes per person playing. So maybe plus 1 hour. So I would say, let's see, for 3 people, we can usually run a game in like 3.5 hours. It's usually, for 4 people, it's usually 4 hours and maybe some change. But also, if you're playing it for the first time, it takes a little longer. Second time, you can really speed through it. But then if you're really experienced as a role player, or if you're having writers play and they're just like, let's just spend another whole hour on world building. Well, let's create not just one relationship between like players, but everybody has another relationship with, like, you people can make it last longer if they want, depending on, and sometimes they like a lot of extra scenes. There's a way to just do it kind of like boom, 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 like according to the book. And there's a way to like have flavor and to play for longer. So mostly I would say 3 to 4 hours for 3 to 4 players. That's the average. But I saw with a group of fantasy novelists at a friend's house on a gaming day, 9.5 hours. I'd never seen it. It was so epic. I was like, I'm out. I'm not going to be a part of this game, but I will go have a nap on the couch and you guys have fun.
That's a lot of Mountain Dew and cereal.
Yes. It was like a little bit beyond my current endurance. However, I loved that they had fun. They took a lot of breaks, but they really just ground through to the end and had a very elaborate world that they built around it.
That's really cool. Who did the artwork?
There's a tattoo artist in Chicago, our friend Rebecca Houston at Heathen Ink. I think that's what the name of her parlor. So she did all the artwork on the cards and the comic book. And then the graphic designer and who did all the other art, the incidentals, is Shannon Potratz, and he works with Outland Entertainment. So we brought Beck in, they brought Shannon in, and like so beautiful. Like, it's just, the rule book is so pretty. And the way Carlos and I wrote it, there's the rules as written, and then we basically played through a 2-person game and kind of had a dialogue as we were playing the game, saying this part refers to this part of the rules. So we did it in kind of like both a rules writing way and then a dialogue way for different kinds of learners,
Yeah, and dynamically, you could almost create a novel with an interaction between the different.
We've both, because we're asked to write for anthologies sometimes, or short stories. So we've used the world because we know the world so well, and we've done card draws. So we've had several short stories that take place in that world already, and we talk about sometimes either doing a call for an anthology where everybody writes in the world or writing a novel in that world. But we definitely play in the fiction space. One of the Kickstarter rewards for, we backed in 10 hours and then we're like, we need to have some extensions. So we had written enough short stories and poetry based on the cards themselves at all Infernal Salons to have a collection that we were able to put together very fast and be like, this is a little extra for you since you are giving us your money. So thank you. There is Infernal Bargains. The collection is also available. And it's just things we've done in Infernal Salons.
Sounds like a great alternative to this AI scourge, right? If you're looking for creative ideation,
and community,
new ideas, play the game.
Yeah, play the game, play together, write together. I guess that it's a way to do it. It's maybe not the only way to do it, but it's the way we like to do it. So yeah, I think that it's a way in for people who maybe want to explore role-playing games and are afraid of reading a 300-page rule book, where something a little bit more like figure it out on the fly is available. So
yeah, or dedicate 10 years of their life to a D&D character to build up creds, right?
Yeah. Well, I love people that do that. I love it. And I have now watched my fair share of actual plays, more than I ever thought I would 4 years ago. But you can complete a full game of Infernal Bargains in 4 hours with your friends on a given night. And I think that also is a good kind of game. And that there's so much room to replay because there's the 7 plots, but even with the 7 plots, they're interpreted differently every time, depending on your card draws and who's interpreting. So it's like those 7 plots can also be fairly infinite as you're playing. So
very, very fun. And I think it's a neat extension, like a dynamic extension of your creativity when it comes to your narrative writing, your novel.
I never thought I'd get into games and game design, and meeting all of Carlos's game designer friends who he helped establish the New York City board game collective people, board game designers who meet at Whole Foods every week, and they just iterate and iterate and iterate, like amazing minds. And I'd never gone to any gaming conventions before meeting him. So it's this whole different way of thinking, and like just this idea of what is fun mechanically is so mind-blowing. And especially as like a writer and thinking about why are we making this so hard on ourselves, or thinking pedagogically, because Carlos is a professor, he's so interested in games teach you how to play them because you're having fun playing them, because they're just hard enough that they keep you so interested and challenged, but they're fun enough that they keep you going. So fun is like that.
Got to be that balance.
Exactly. And so it's like, so in how to use that in the classroom rather than like this slog of learning where learning just feels like torment. What's the place where learning is fun, where learning, you know, is like improv or like theater or like game? Like, what is that other space that we can bring students into where learning is as natural as being a child and being curious and playing? Because playing is learning when you're a child. It's like, so it's so interesting. And then I'm like, what is fun to me? How do I gamify these things that I've been viewing as chores or duties or obligations, because I can, because the human brain does work like that. It's just all a trick. How do you trick yourself? It's so exciting. It's amazing to watch these incredible game designers like do their what if statements of like, what can you make a game that does this? Or like their mathematical minds and how they can they do math better than I do. So it was like watching them iterate, and like what the smallest thing has to be fun, which is one of the reasons like D&D is fun, because the smallest thing is holding dice in your hand, the feeling of them, the sound of them clattering, that kind of like adrenaline spike of did I fail or did I succeed, or is it somewhere complicated in the middle? That sort of that feeling of chance is, so it already is fun just there, and that is excluding all co-creation, narrative, improv, long-term fantasy storytelling, world building out loud in the air, like all of that. All of your stakes are the hours you spent creating a character, how much of yourself you put into it, how much of a relationship you built with the other characters. Like there's so much on the line in that dice roll and that adrenaline and that feedback. It's so interestingly complicated what must be going on in the brain that whole time. I'm so interested, and I never would have thought I would be interested just a few years ago.
It's kind of a perfect storm of the creative process.
It's one of the amazing ways, and there's such a huge spike in role playing and like internationally, and the interest in it. And I wonder if it's one of the big ways to set against LLMs. You know, it's you have to be together either online or in a room, and you have to be creating out of your own brain and mouth. And if there's a way to say, this is awesome, how do we do this in writing? How do we do this in the classroom? Like, so it's something to set against the LLM and the kind of like billionaire tech bro, make a quick buck, infiltrate everything as fast as before the bubble collapses, or
human creative collaboration.
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds like a pretty good idea, right?
It's so fabulous.
So what's next for C.S.E?
I've got to finish my novel by August. So it really, like, unfortunately, I am like very boring. It's like, I'm on a deadline. That's what I'm doing. I'm collaborating with some friends to create a 6-episode musical theater podcast called The Devil and Lady Midnight. And so we've been working on that for several years. We have a first draft down of all 6 episodes. Each episode follows a different character. We have a lot of songs written. We have a lot of the dialogue written. And this year, the job this year is to revise and polish and pick and choose and expand. We decided, we're like, do we expand or contract? We were thinking if we contract each episode down to 35 minutes, then there's a possibility to do all of them together at once in one big night of a musical. But then we were like, we're actually much more interested in expanding each episode to be like 90 minutes. There's no chance of doing it in one night. However, this was always meant to be a podcast and not a live performance, and we can always extract for a live performance. So we made that decision, and now we get to sink into it and really get our teeth in. Carlos and I have designed another TTRPG that we're playtesting called Till Our Fingers Bled, which is a rock-you mockumentary where you're playing a band that had been crazy popular in their youth, had broken up and are now coming back for a reunion. And there's it's sort of the main mechanic is like almost like the card deck is like a Rolling Stones interviewer, basically. And by the way they ask questions and how you answer them develops your character, the real story, and what you say happened. So it's been really fun playtesting that, and we're gonna polish that up. So there's always some awesome things happening. Next week I get to be a poet at St. John's University, talking about poetry in this age and performance and you know, how poetry is in conversation with the world. So I'm very excited about that.
Really fun. And then what's your writing discipline like regarding hitting that August deadline? Do you work every day? Do you give yourself a break? How are
Well,
you approaching it?
so it's like playtesting, right? Right now, I'm doing more consistently than I ever have before, and that is all due to having writing partners who show up on silent Zooms basically at certain times. So Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday are when I know I have people for like 3 to 4 hours, and that really makes me show up and sit down. Now, my goal is on the other days, there's another silent writing group that meets, and they always meet consistently at 9 a.m. to noon. And if you get in, you have to get in right at 9 because they shut the doors. You can't enter after that. And they close right down at noon. Nobody talks, kind of wave at the beginning. So my goal is to write on Mondays and Thursdays on those days.
How does that work? So you log into the Zoom and your Brady Bunch on the screen. There's a bunch of you, and
Everybody,
then you wave and you go, all right, we're all here to write,
yeah,
and we're going to kind of
it's
keep each
a way
other accountable by
yeah,
writing.
show up and sit down at a specific time every day, which is
Oh, that's fascinating. I've never heard that before. That's very
And,
interesting.
like on days when I don't do that, it's like, I really should clean the kitchen. All those dishes haven't been done. I have to go grocery shopping. Like, there are 1,000 other things that I should do as a grown up person in the world and will do because I feel like more responsible to that. And partly because even chores can be pleasurable when you're listening to audiobooks. So there's like a reward system, but sitting down in the chair, and then sometimes it's like sitting down and then it's an hour later and you're like, this is like all I've done is reread the last chapter. But the thing is, Sitzfleisch, sitting down is the most important thing anyway. So what my trick myself to sit down. And how do I do that? Be accountable. And right now, the thing that's working, and different things work at different times of my life, but right now the things that working is showing up for people. The people who I show up for 3 times a week are so personal friends of mine, and I'm much more likely to show up. The 9 o'clock people are people I sort of know peripherally, and they don't care if I show up or not. So that's a little bit harder, and it's more on me. But I also want to make sure I have days off. But one of the things that happens on weekends is Carlos teaches during the week, but on weekends is when he writes. So I have to make sure I'm taking some kind of weekend for myself. So generally, the way I think it usually works is like this: Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, writing. Usually Saturday, Sunday, writing with Carlos. And then usually Mondays and Thursdays, I take off-ish. On Mondays and Tuesdays in the early morning, I do wake up super early to write with a friend who lives in New Mexico. She's 2 hours earlier than I am. And we have an hour and a half together before she goes to work. So I do write on Monday mornings really early anyway. So that's kind of like my patchwork writing office hours. But my goal, especially for the next few months, is to amp it up a bit because I can take other kinds of breaks, maybe not as consistently. When my body will always take a break when it wants to, whether or not I want it to. So basically, I'm going to try to amp up the writing, make it more consistent, and take breaks when I need to, but not always like it has to be on a Thursday, just kind of be more flexible but disciplined. That's the goal.
We've come full circle. Remember one of my first questions I asked you meeting you, that you're so effervescent, and you're also very social. You're very extroverted and engaged. And writing is so solitary by nature. It's very introverted and you're in your own space.
I would
And
say
you found a nice balance
Right.
between these two where
Pretty introverted. I know it seems I'm theater trained and I do like people, but I would say I'm more introverted than extroverted. So I would say this social writing is new since COVID. I never had to have it before then. I was always a solitary writer, but because I'm now on a more consistent deadline, things have to be done faster and not in my own sweet time. This is a way to do that more consistently, and it's sort of like I, it is interesting to me, but it's still relatively new. It's still just a few years old for me, and I'm interested to see, will it always be like this? Will I go back to solitary writing? I still can't really write in public very easily. I kind of need to not hear or see anything. Having people up in my corner is good. I can't be in any sort of like writing group where we're chatting. It's really like, hi, what are you doing today? Okay, great. Silence. If it's not the silent group, then minimal contact. But even though they're my friends, so we do kind of chat at the very beginning, that we really try to be like, we actually are here to write. So it's an interesting thing. It's social in that we're showing up for each other, but we're showing up for each other because we know we'll work more together than apart at this stage of our lives for whatever reason.
I just think that's fascinating. I mean, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Whatever works. It's so opposite of my own approach. I just lock myself in my apartment. I used to listen to music, like Sarah McLachlan's first album used to play over and over and over again. But now at this point, I need silence.
And I used to be so silent and no people. And now I need a few people. And I listen to music in a way I never could before. I can't listen to anything with any words, but I listen to gaming soundtracks, cello, classical. I can sometimes listen to like chant as long as they're not English words, but it takes a little more effort. But for whatever reason, right now, sound a little more stimuli is what I need versus anything in the last 35 years, 40 years, which I needed the least amount. It's really weird, but we do change,
I love that. I think that's cool. I'm like flipped it. I used to write in a coffee shop in Chicago, and all my writing, I had a little laptop.
Yeah.
And there had to be sounds and people.
Yeah.
And then listening to loop music. And now I'm the opposite.
Yeah.
I'm just all locked up into my own thing, and I'm totally content doing it that way.
Yeah.
I love how it just keeps changing.
And who knows what it'll be for both of us in 5 years. Like my friend Delia says, she just does what works until it doesn't work anymore, and then she does the next thing. And I think that's interesting too, because we don't end up what they call in marine biology pattern swimming. We need different things at different parts of our lives.
I think that's awesome. That's great. You're so inspirational.
Oh, thank you.
And it's been lovely talking to you. It's just your journey is so awesome in the sense where you're driven, you knew what you wanted to do, and at the same time you negotiate, you compromise, you create relationships, you welcome feedback, you partner, you enhance the community. It's really, really been awesome getting to know you. I was familiar with your work, and I'm sure for a lot of viewers and listeners too, just like Socrates distrusted writing because you're not with someone debating them. Plato wrote it all down, and we're thankful for that. But we take for granted that we get like pieces of paper or even a screen and their words. And we don't really get to meet and talk to the mind and the heart behind all those feelings that are coming out in the words. And then when that veil parts, sometimes it's kind of icky.
Yeah.
Like I met David Foster Wallace when he published Infinite Jest in the mid-90s. It was kind of discouraging. He was kind of arrogant and kind of an asshole.
Yeah.
And I had trouble finishing the last 100 pages of the book. Wow. And then other times it's like really welcoming and surprising when you meet someone who's exciting and enthusiastic and very human and warm.
Well, I think Carlos says too, it's like the whole idea of death of the artist, right? Like sometimes art is our best selves. It's like we might be assholes, but if there's anything good in us, and we've tried so hard for so many hours to distill whatever wisdom or goodness we were given onto the page, and I feel like that should be acknowledged. But also, when you're confronted with a person who was not a good human and put all of their best self just into their work. It's like, and then you were horrible to how many other people? Like, it's hard then, after knowing that, to re-engage with the work. There's some grace and forgiveness involved. I think, like, somebody who doesn't know anything about David Foster Wallace can still derive great amounts of brilliance, I think, from his work, and from other writers who have had difficult journeys as human beings in the world. And there are plenty of them. And at any point I could become one of them. I know that. So like, I don't know. I'm hoping for that we all give each other some kind of grace, but also know that at some point you have to be a real human being in the world and not just a good artist too. I do believe that, but I don't know. We just have these slim margins of.
Yeah, it's kind of scary. It's kind of scary. I lived in New York for 13 years, and Thomas Pynchon lives in Manhattan too. And I bet you our paths might have crossed, like he's like one block over, or maybe we were in the same restaurant. I don't know. He's never really been seen. And I was always terrified of actually meeting him because I admire so much of his work. And like Gore Vidal, who never wanted to meet the artists of books that he really loved because you're so set up for disappointment.
Yeah.
But as you point out, it's great to actually meet someone and it's refreshing. It's like, I like this person now, instead of the opposite, like, ooh, I don't want to look at their stuff anymore. I mean, meeting you, talking to you, I want to read more of your stuff.
And I'm so glad. Congratulations on your debut novel. Thank you for doing this and being in conversation with artists. And I hope you meet many, many more people in your community.
Oh, I really, really appreciate it. And let's keep in touch. I'm going to have links and description in the video and in the audio podcast. Thank you so much for making time in your busy deadline day.
I'm
Allison, C.S.E. Cooney, and keep doing all the great things that you do. Like, comment, share the science fiction and fantasy podcast. And I'd love to follow up with you after the book comes out, how it's received. And that'd be super fun. And hopefully our paths can cross at one of these cons or events, like Reader Con or something like that. Would be great.
Not this year because I'm con.
Yeah, you mentioned you're focused. Yeah. You are focused.
Next year, is a book out year, so I try to do a lot of appearances just because that's also just part of the work, it's part of being a professional. And like, for the Comic-Cons, it's not, it takes a great deal of energy and focus, but it is very rewarding for the human connections.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. We'll follow up, and best of luck with hitting that deadline. We're sure you're going to do it. And we're really looking for Saint Death's Doorway, right?
Yes.
For the third book in the series. And we'll check out your card game too.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care now.
Bye, Mookie.
Bye-bye.